Okay, last but not least, just so everyone knows, Kelsey cheated. We said
no rules.
These were supposed to be 15-second slides. She went in and changed every slide so it's on a specific time. So
I hit my 5 minutes.
there you go. Anyway, that's the other way to look at it. She's being resourceful. So Kelsey Pieper is really speaking for Adrian Kantner, couldn't be here, on examining resource needs for well users after flooding events. And Adrian's from Louisiana, correct? Okay, yeah. He was originally on it. Yeah.
First slide.
There you go.
Perfect. So hi everyone, I'm back. So as Steve said, this is actually a project done by Dr. Adrian Kantner at LSU, and this was done after the flooding event last summer in Louisiana. So summer 2016, there was a major flooding event, really in the Baton Rouge area, and so we went in and looked at Livingston Parish. As Clay mentioned, that's county, so we looked at the county, which was one of the hardest hit areas by this flood. So just to give you an idea of what it looked like, the area is inundated with water, about 10 feet high for multiple days, and there was a lot of structural damage. And the water came in so quickly that people actually had to be evacuated out by boats. So Adrian and I started talking, and Adrian has a well, and she said, my well's been underwater for a couple days. Do I need to do anything? And so as people started coming home, we realized that, we should be talking to them and telling people that they need to be concerned. Oh, this is not. My animation's not working. Anyways, that people need to be concerned about their well water and considering that. So we wrote to the NSF and received a rapid grant to provide free well water testing to the residents in Livingston Parish. We worked with the local sheriff and the churches to communicate our program and basically sat in a parking lot over a weekend and handed out kits. We were there about 2 months after residents started coming home. We were able to work with 113 well residents. We did water quality testing, but what I'm going to talk to you about is our well survey, looking at resource needs. We asked them to fill out a 4-page survey. And we asked things like well water usage. And as we've seen, people like their well water, they assume it's safe. They were drinking and cooking with it. But then after the flood, about half our homeowners reported that there was either damage to their system or their septic system or their well. Not surprisingly, they switched over to bottled water. We saw a reduction in people thinking their water was safe. But what's really interesting, and I don't know if it's going to show up, is that, there you go, about only 7% of our homeowners actually participated in well water testing. And this is problematic because we know, as Clay talked about, there are opportunities, so something's going on. So we asked them, why didn't you test? So before the flood, we found that most people weren't concerned. They didn't think it was an issue. Again, going back to they didn't know where to go. But then after the flood, what we found was that they were concerned, and the main reason they were not participating was because they didn't know where to go. So there's an information gap. And then we saw this with treatment and maintenance as well, that people knew they wanted to do things, but they didn't know what to do. They weren't equipped with the knowledge. So we asked them, did anyone talk to you about well water contamination before the flood? And we really didn't see much response. And then we, again, followed up after and said, anyone talk to you after? And we saw a little bit better response. We found people talking about people at shelters were information, FEMA, but really just most people didn't think they were getting a lot of information about their well water. So we looked at the outlets of where they were looking for this information. And the main source was the news, either television or radio, but they were looking towards the news. And then looking at community members, family, friends, or community leaders. This was pretty consistent before and after the flood, with the news being the primary source of information. There was a little bump in community members looking towards family and friends. And then the other interesting thing, just because we often rely a lot on online information, we found that during the flood, 70% of our residents had to evacuate for an average of 8 days. When they returned, half didn't have power and half didn't have internet. So this really starts to get the concept, if we're trying to do things online, that they may not have access to that. So the 4 topics that homeowners told us that they want information on after a flooding event is where to get water quality testing, what type of treatment options are available, what are the potential health consequences, and then they wanted specific information about their wells, things you'd get from the well logs. So just keep in mind as we talk about this, this is a study that was focused in Livingston Parish. It was a convenient sampling. We sat in a parking lot. But really, what we're trying to get across is that when we think about well users, they are looking to government agencies, to extension, for information. And government agencies and extension are providing that. But sometimes there's a disconnect. The information we're giving is not readily available to homeowners. So our group is trying to understand that and better link those two organizations, the homeowners and the resources. So we're doing this in routine and emergency settings. And the next step is working with different states to understand what organizations are working and what are their dissemination strategies and how do we better link those. So we're doing some surveys looking at who's doing what in your state in terms of programming so we can better pair them and help with outreach efforts. So thank you for your time. Not terrible.
All right, I'm not sure the best way to handle this, but questions? Who has, I guess, questions and for who would be the way to handle it? Go ahead. Come up to the mic, and if, yeah, I guess, I don't know if we want the speakers to come up. I don't think we need them all to come up. No, all right, go ahead.
So Kevin from University of Wisconsin Extension. My question's for Cliff. The point about mitigating or surveying how many people have mitigated risks. Do you have examples, does NGWA have examples of good survey tools or survey questions that could be used that people like us could integrate into our program efforts?
Well, we didn't actually get into that. We were mainly trying to determine from the experience of people who are running these programs whether or not, well, we're trying to find out what they were doing in the way of follow-up. And what we were finding was that very, very few actually went out at all past them getting the result. And the ones that did, quite often, the few that did didn't go that far out. And we know it can sometimes take time. So that's about the extent of it. But it certainly suggests that maybe some additional effort to try to come up with those models would be good and circulate that. I'll actually see if I can check some of that out, and if I find anything, I'll circulate it among the group.
Any other questions? All right. There you go. We have to get it there.
Okay.
Right here, you do that, and I'll hold this and use it too.
Kelsey, I'm Julie Connell from RCAC in California, and we had a record wet year and a record snowfall, and we're fixing to get it. So we flooded a little bit in the winter when it rained, and we're about to get it, as soon as the snow melts. So what would you suggest for me to get in place ahead of time for these well owners?
So we've actually worked with two states. We've worked in Louisiana, and actually we're working with North Carolina right now. And so we are starting to compare their approaches. What we saw happening in North Carolina was they actually did they knew the hurricane was coming, so they had more time to prepare. So they purchased sampling kits, they advertised to the residents to get this. It was on the local news. They got their materials ready, so when, because even the health departments had to evacuate, but when everyone came back in, everything was in place, ready to go. So that's one of the strategies we've seen working. I think this is kind of why we're doing it, is to see what people are doing and what has been successful. But that's kind of one example of what we've seen that has been successful, is getting stuff ready if beforehand you go in.
And you have a reliable funding source for that, right? As you're a state agency?
No, I'm just a researcher.
Okay.
No, so I'm actually partnering with Louisiana and North Carolina health departments to evaluate this as a researcher. Okay. North Carolina, our state lab donated free kits for bacteria for any well owner that was flooded. I don't know where their funding source came, other than just the goodness in their heart. But I know, but Louisiana definitely works with Extension and did low-cost testing that way.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Next question. Shirley, there we go, all right. Who's it for?
Not me. It's not for me.
No, who's it?
Where did Cindy end up? Standing in the back. That's like gonna fight. So, did you ever open the 1945 sealed well?
No, we have not, and the owner has it the last that I spoke with him.
And I guess that's like a real question, because we run into a lot of these wells too. Is it better to just not look inside and open them? I mean, how much vulnerability and how much damage are you going to do to the well, as opposed to just putting a treatment system on for the problem?
Since that homeowner had children in the home, I recommended that they do open it because there may be disinfection that is needed. They did have quite an extensive treatment system in the home, and they have replaced some of the plumbing just outside of the home. So the other question is how much longer is that pump going to last? I just can't imagine that it hasn't been unsealed since 1945 with pump issues. So I did recommend that maybe they have a well driller come out and open the well, evaluate the pump, and even service it or replace it. Do some disinfection if necessary, but otherwise, at least look the pump over to make sure that they weren't going to be left in a lurch with 3 children in the home.
This is Frida, Minnesota State Health Department. My question's for Ginger, and I don't know where you ended up. Could you provide a little bit more information? So you create this beautiful report for private well users, and then how do you deliver it to them? Is it digital, or is it mailed to them? Is it to every person who ever tests, or do they get to self-select for this additional service?
So this is a very new program. I'm very new to the position, and it's something my board has asked me to bring to the position coming from my background. So far, we are actually going out to their homes afterwards with a hard copy of the report so that they can put that in their record file. We work with Cindy, so she provides, we talk to them ahead of time, but she provides me the assessment, and then I build on that assessment and basically give them a folder that they can contain all the reports and testing results and everything so that they have that document available for the next owner or their children or whoever ends up getting that property with that well on it afterwards.
I'm still walking, okay. I have a question for Jesse. Where's Jesse? Hi, Jesse. You mentioned being able to detect the direction of coliform movement. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Not really being able to detect it, but being able to hypothesize where it was coming from.
Just based on the location of sources of...
Yeah, in order to detect it, that was why it was a hypothesis in the end, because nobody wanted to spend all the money to have a nice groundwater hydrologist like Steve come out and drill a bunch of test holes and try to figure out what direction the water's moving and all that. So in the end, we weren't able to give them all the answers, but we were at least able to identify some of the possible causes in the area. Okay. And since they do zoning and planning as well, the sanitarian is also the zoning and planning lady. She's just going to zone and plan that area out to have deeper wells that are grouted deeper and avoid that aquifer from now on. So I've kind of followed up with her a little bit to see what's going on with it.
All right, thanks.
Didn't you also say that the ponds were new?
Yeah, the ponds are new. So basically what he'd done is he dammed up that entire watershed on that side, which typically diverted the water around the outside and dug them out, dammed them up, and then drilled himself a nice well to fill the ponds with as the ponds went dry down into the aquifer. And that was continuous. They just continuously filled the ponds like a golf course. So,
any other questions? Who are you asking? I give this to the speaker, not to... Oh, you do? Okay. Yeah, you have to go up there. Oh. You can do that. Who are you asking to? Cliff? Oh, okay. This isn't a seated question.
So this is a question for Cliff, and I'm going to ask one, and then I'm going to give something. So the question is, when you interviewed people about collecting the data to determine where the wells were and where the public water intersected using tax records and the PUC data, the public utility data, I'm just not familiar. Is the public utility data readily available electronically, or do they consider their client list proprietary? Is there a way to get that?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that. I mean, these were several specific programs, and I don't know their exact methodology for doing it. And so when I say something's simple, but it's not easy, part of the not easy thing may be working out whatever kind of cooperation is necessary to share those records. But I don't know exactly what methodologies those two programs in particular use that same, or actually three use that same approach, but they were all able to cooperate with the utility to get those records, yeah. And
we participated as one of your survey people, so I know you can't share that information, but I'll share it.
Okay.
Allison McCann from the University of Rhode Island Extension has an excellent post-survey on mitigating risks, and I'd be happy to share those questions with anybody who wants them. Thank you.
I would think it'd matter whether it's a public utility in the community or versus like here it's Illinois American, they're a private entity, and some of that's probably more of a pain, is the bottom line.
I would assume if it's public, it's a little easier. It's accessible.
Any other questions?
So my question is also for speakers from Kansas. Could somebody speak to the effectiveness of disinfecting a well that's under the influence of surface water?
From Kansas.
I don't know that I'm the best person to ask that question, Bill. One of the drillers would probably be best to ask what the best method of disinfecting a well under the influence of ground surface water would be. You wouldn't really disinfect the well. The well's always going to be under the influence of surface water. At that point in time, one of the recommendations I gave back to all the well owners is just coliform. Obviously, it's not deadly to them, but since you have surface contamination present, everything else that might come with surface contamination might show up at any time. So that was one of the recommendations that I gave them, was you may want to do additional testing. You may also have to add treatment for bacteria just to cover everything, because it may not be there today and it may be there tomorrow, because you just don't know, especially when you're under the influence of surface water. So, and another thing is, we don't know if this is going to occur in dry years or not. I mean, obviously it'd be something great to follow up on and see if it's just because it was a really wet year and the aquifer was recharging and that pond happened to be recycling more often or something like that. So not for sure on that. But as for disinfecting a well that's under the influence, I'd say no. I'd say you're going to have to add treatment regardless, just like a city would when they build their municipal wells down in the bottoms. So.
Yeah, the same thing with Tuscarora in that area. They have a lot of bacteria contamination. The only solution really was to add continuous treatment, whether it's chlorine or UV, just because it's septic contamination and it's always going to be there.
Hi, I'm Candy from RCAP in New York, and this question is for Jason from Mississippi. And my question is about the poultry farming that you were talking about, a lot of poultry farms, and how even though arsenic's been banned from poultry food since I think 2015 or 2013, if anybody was tracking arsenic contamination as a result of poultry farming, and if they're tracking it since then in terms of reduction in arsenic because of the ban on arsenic in chicken food.
Your question is directed toward arsenic, and we have done zero in relation to arsenic. Our biggest, I guess, effort with that publication was more in the placement and sizing of wells to supply, because one of the issues we were seeing, location of the well in proximity to the houses. For one, you're seeing people that would also expand their farms, and then they realize they don't have a large enough supply, they didn't put in large enough lines. So we were looking more or less from the sizing and placement and not contaminants. That's actually something we're starting to look at now. It's a great question, but I don't have an answer for you.
Well, thanks. Maybe, I'd ask this generally to people who are involved in arsenic research and in places where there is a lot of poultry farming, if anybody can answer that, because it always disturbed me, to say the least, and I'm relieved to know that it's banned, but I'm curious if anybody's tracking the decrease in arsenic as a result of that ban.
We got somebody.
So I can make a comment. Keith Nachman at Johns Hopkins has done research on that, and I think he has some available on the web, some of the reports that he's done and some recent work that he's published. So that would be a resource I would recommend looking at, and I can send that to you, Candy.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. All right.
Caitlin, I'm with the Michigan State Health Department. This is maybe a question for Kelsey. It might be more of just a thought. Have you given any consideration increased flooding due to climate change and what we can do to kind of prepare for that? That's a loaded question.
That's the big one in the room, isn't it? Yeah.
I don't personally do anything with that. My colleague Adrian Kattner does. And I think anyone probably in Louisiana can probably talk to you about the increased flooding, because I think that was their second, and guys correct me if I'm wrong, but second big flood of the year that they were not expecting. But so I know that if you want, like, Adrian would be a great person to talk to.
Officially, it doesn't exist.
Oh yeah, it doesn't exist.
I'm behind you. Well, I think everyone needs to be practical about it and realize that in the climate we have today, we can't really talk about climate change, but we can certainly talk about droughts and floods and warmer temperatures, right? So talk about what the results are.
I was just curious, Lisa, if you have any estimate about what the actual percentage in decrease of call volume was through your, I guess, continuous improvement project.
We don't have any numbers because we don't have our staff spend the time tracking how many calls they get, because that takes away from time doing inspection. But I was thinking a lot about it when Cliff gave his talk about, well, how can we, we just really are only anecdotally measuring the improvement. It would be nice if we could do it with data.
Anybody else? All right, well, that went well. I'm